On a Tuesday morning in early November of 2001, on a reclamation haul road outside Jessup, Pennsylvania, a site foreman named Ray Dombrowski stood at the edge of a collapsed berm and watched $310,000 worth of equipment sit nose down in 4 feet of mud with no recovery company willing to touch it. 2 days earlier, a Cat D9 bulldozer had been finished grading a drainage shoulder along the upper rim of an old strip mine hollow when the road gave. 3 days of rain before that had saturated the shale and clay fill under the road surface without leaving any visible sign from above. The D9's left track crossed on a ground that looked solid and wasn't. The berm face collapsed inward. The dozer tilted left, and before the operator had time to do anything useful, 49 tons of Caterpillar slid sideways and went 40 feet down the hollow face. The operator, a 31-year-old named Greg Pachowski, jumped from the cab as the machine went and hit the slope on his shoulder. He walked up the hollow on his own and spent 2 days in the Scranton hospital with a separated shoulder and a story he'd still be telling 20 years later. The D9 did not walk anywhere. It came to rest nose down at the hollow bottom, left blade buried under the collapse, right track pointing at the sky, cab tilted 38 degrees, sitting in groundwater that had pooled and reached the bottom of the engine compartment. Ray had called Northeastern Heavy Equipment Recovery out of Scranton the same afternoon the dozer went in. They sent their flagship unit, a Liebherr LTM 1100 all-terrain crane, 100-ton rated capacity, $680,000 worth of equipment. The crane set up on the haul road above the hollow, and the operator worked 2 hours on rigging angles. At the reach needed to get to the D9 down in the hollow, 64 feet at the angle the geometry required, the crane's rated capacity fell to 17 tons. The dozer with its blade, mud-packed tracks, and the water it had been sitting in for 48 hours was closer to 55 tons. There was no lift from above. The crane repositioned onto the hollow's access road, an old mine cut that angled down the far side of the hollow at 13 degrees of grade. Halfway down, the outrigger pads started sinking. The road base was 50-year-old mine spoil, shale fines over clay, and 3 days of rain had found every gap in it. The operator backed the crane out and told Ray that if they pushed further, the crane would join the dozer at the bottom, and then Ray would have 2 recovery problems. He moved off-site the following morning. Northeastern sent a 60-ton hydraulic wrecker the next day. The wrecker got further down the access road than the crane had managed, but the hollow curved at the bottom, and the D9 had come to rest against the far face of it. A straight pull required swinging the boom right, which meant putting the wrecker's rear wheels off the access road edge. The operator tried the position twice and felt the truck shift both times. He told Ray he wasn't going over the side for this job. He loaded out and left before noon. Over the next 36 hours, 4 other recovery companies drove to the site. Every one of them walked to the hollow rim, looked at the dozer, looked at the access road, and turned down the job. The most detailed refusal came from a man named Rick Dalton, who ran Dalton Recovery out of Wilkes-Barre. He had 8 wreckers, all modern, all painted the same clean blue and white, and he told Ray with genuine regret that the ground was too saturated, the hollow geometry was wrong, and any equipment heavy enough to pull the D9 was too heavy for the access road. His written estimate for an alternate approach ran to $96,000. Pump the hollow, install geotextile slope fabric, build a compacted stone haul road down to the machine, then come back in 3 weeks. The reclamation contractor was paying $4,400 a day in standby costs while the D9 sat in the mud. Without it, the whole job stopped. Ray had been on site for 60 hours straight by Tuesday morning. That was when the old pickup came through the gate. It was a late 1980s Dodge Ram, faded blue, with a hand-painted sign on the door that read Cech & Sons, Hauling and Recovery, Archbald, Pennsylvania. The man who got out of it moved with the deliberate care of someone whose knees and hips had been at this for decades. He was heavy-set through the chest and shoulders, wearing canvas work pants and a green wool shirt with no coat, and the 36-degree morning did not appear to concern him. His name was Walter Cech. He was 73 years old. Before saying anything about what Walter did on that hollow, you need to understand who he was. Walter had been born in 1928 in Archbald, 9 miles north of Scranton, to Bohuslav and Anna Cech. Bohuslav had come from Moravia in 1919 at 18 years old, gone into the anthracite coal mines north of Scranton, because that was where the Bohemian and Slovak communities had settled and work was available, and spent 14 years underground before a partial roof fall left him with a back that couldn't take the mine work. He moved to surface operations, hauling equipment and stone for the strip mines and quarries expanding through Lackawanna and Susquehanna counties in the 1930s. By the time Walter was 16 and working alongside him, Bohuslav had 3 trucks and a dozen steady clients in the mining and quarrying business. In 1952, Bohuslav bought a 1948 Brockway 260 at a Pennsylvania Highway Department surplus auction in Wilkes-Barre for $875. The truck had served 4 years as a heavy equipment transporter for the district maintenance depot and had low hours for its age. It sat at the back of the auction lot among dump trucks and graders, and nobody else wanted it because the part supply for Brockway was already less reliable than for the big 3 manufacturers, and post-war buyers wanted trucks they could keep running cheaply. Bohuslav bought it because it was the only truck on the lot with a frame rated to carry what the quarry clients actually needed moved, and because the Brockway name meant something specific to men who worked heavy equipment in the Northeast. Brockway motor trucks had been building out of Cortland, New York since 1912. They supplied heavy industry, municipalities, and the military through both world wars, and machines they made were built to a standard that prioritized durability over economy. The 260 line was their heavy class, a truck with a cast steel frame and a suspension calibrated for sustained loads on unpaved industrial roads, not optimized for highway speed. The transmission ratios were low compared to trucks of similar size from other manufacturers, designed for maintaining torque at slow speed under load rather than efficient over-the-road performance. The boom on this particular truck had been fabricated by the Pennsylvania Highway Department shop in Wilkes-Barre, an A-frame built from 6-inch structural steel channel welded by a millwright named Kazimierz Nowak, who had worked at Bethlehem Steel before the war and knew how to put metal together. The winch drum ran off a power takeoff from the transmission through a reduction gear set. No hydraulics. Mechanical through and through. Bohuslav used that truck on the mine and quarry haul roads of northeastern Pennsylvania from 1952 until he died in 1974. Walter inherited it and kept it running and kept working it through the 1970s and into the 1980s. The work got less frequent as modern recovery equipment improved and as better access roads came with the larger operations, but it never stopped entirely. The old roads still existed. The hollows and strip cuts carved into the hills of Lackawanna and Susquehanna counties in the 1940s and 1950s didn't disappear when the mining companies did. Every few years, something went wrong in a place where ground conditions or access geometry made modern heavy equipment useless, and Walter's phone would ring. By 2001, the Brockway hadn't been on a paid recovery job in 18 months. Walter was winding down, passing the day-to-day hauling work to his son Dennis and a crew of younger drivers. He had been listening to his scanner Tuesday morning from habit, the way men who've spent half a century working the mines still monitor mine traffic the way other people check the weather. He heard Ray Dombrowski on the radio at 5:40 a.m., going through his list of recovery companies, getting turned down one after another. He called the site office and got Ray on the phone. Ray told him the whole situation in about 4 minutes. "I've got a wrecker," Walter said. "Old one. It's lighter than what your other equipment's been, and the boom geometry's different. Might be able to work from where they couldn't anchor." There was a pause on Ray's end. "What kind of wrecker?" 1948 Brockway 260. "My father bought it in 52, and I've been running it since 74. Another pause, longer. "In 1948 Brockway. How much does it weigh?" "About 19,000 pounds loaded with rigging. Your modern equipment's been failing at 34,000 pounds, the crane closer to 50,000. Your access road might hold me where it didn't hold them. I can't promise. I want to walk the hollow first." Ray thought about the $96,000 estimate and the $4,400 a day in standby. "All right, come look at it." Walter walked to the hollow rim when he arrived and stood at the edge for 2 minutes without saying anything. Then he asked Ray for a probe bar. Ray found a 3-foot steel pry bar in the equipment shed and handed it over. Walter walked the access road down to the bottom, stopping at 6 points to push the bar into the ground and read the depth before hitting resistance. He studied the D9's position from 3 angles, looked at the far hollow rim where a stand of mature maples ran along the edge, and came back up the access road. His boots were muddy to the ankle. He was breathing harder than he'd been going down. "I can rig it," Walter said. "I'll need your crew to help me set anchors. Give me 2 hours of setup." Ray nodded. "Bring your equipment up." Walter drove back to the gate and returned 35 minutes later with the Brockway, and every person on that site stopped when it came through. The truck was large and old and completely without any concession to appearance. The cab was square-shouldered, the hood opening from the sides on heavy hinges, with a grill of vertical bars that had lost most of their plating decades ago and were showing bare metal underneath, gone to a dark patina that wasn't rust but was everything just before it. The paint was a faded olive green, with Cech and Sons lettered on the doors in gold paint that had been touched up twice in slightly different shades of gold, so the letters were inconsistent in a way that made them look alive. The A-frame boom rose from the frame behind the cab, fabricated from heavy channel steel, with the winch drum sitting between the frame rails and the cable wound in tight, even layers without a single crossed wrap. The machine rode high on its axles, the frame clearance visible even loaded, and it came through the gate at 8 miles an hour in low gear, the engine at a slow idle, making a sound that was lower and more deliberate than modern diesel equipment. Rick Dalton had come back to pick up a piece of rigging his crew had left on site the day before. He was standing by his pickup when the Brockway came through the gate, and he walked over to where Ray was standing. "Ray, what is that thing?" 1948 Brockway 260. Walter Cech runs it out of Archbald. Rick watched it come to a stop near the hollow rim. He had 18 years in heavy recovery. He stared at it the way people stare at something that shouldn't be where it is. "You're going to let that attempt this recovery. I'm going to let him rig it. That boom is a fixed A-frame. He can't adjust the pull angle. That winch is mechanical, no hydraulics, no load management system." "That's right." Rick shook his head slowly. He didn't leave. He leaned against his truck with his arms crossed. Walter backed the Brockway to the top of the access path, got out, and began setting his rigging out on the road surface in the order he would use it. Cable, blocks, shackles, chain, all of it old, and all of it maintained with the kind of consistency that comes from never throwing anything away and always knowing where it is. Dennis Warwick, the Northeastern heavy crane operator who had also come back to retrieve paperwork, walked over from his cab and watched. Ray's crew foreman, Ed Sulkowski, 44 years in construction work, walked over to where Walter was laying out the blocks. "What's the plan?" Ed said. Walter didn't look up. "I go down the access road to the bottom and anchor my truck frame to those maples on the far rim for lateral support. Your crew drives 2 ground anchors into the haul road up here, 10 feet back from the rim for my overhead line. Then I run a 3-part line down to the dozer frame and pull while the truck provides base tension." "What's your winch rated for?" "Manufacturer rated at 30,000 pounds single line. 3-part mechanical advantage brings it to 90,000. Friction losses in the blocks take it back down. Call it 68,000 working. Dozer weighs 55 tons with a mud load." Walter straightened up and looked at Ed directly for the first time. "I'm not lifting it. I'm shifting it. That machine is nose down with the left blade buried under the collapsed material. If I shift the load distribution forward and rotate it 8 degrees, the right track gets purchase and the machine can drive itself out under its own power. The engine runs. I talked to your operator this morning." Ed looked at the Brockway, looked down into the hollow, looked back at Walter. He didn't say anything else. He went to find the crew. Raymond went to the Sterling's tool compartment first. He pulled out a rotary hammer, a canvas bag of 3/4-inch carbide bits, and 2 boxes of grade 8 anchor bolts with 8-inch shanks. He set them on the road and went back for the snatch blocks, 4 of them, heavy cast steel with fixed hooks, the kind manufactured in the early 1960s when working hardware was built by men who expected to use it for 40 years. He laid the blocks beside the bolts and stood looking at the rock face above the switchback for a long moment before he picked up the rotary hammer. Carson Webb came over. "Where are the primaries going?" Raymond pointed to two spots on the face, both above the Kenworth position, both in stone that showed a gray-brown density, meaning solid material behind the surface. "Those two. Secondaries 3 feet left of each. Offset so a single fracture plane can't walk both." "How do you read the stone from here?" "Same way I've been reading it since 1978. Carson looked at his laptop. He didn't say anything else. Greg Cook watched Raymond drill the first anchor. The rotary hammer bit through surface limestone and into harder material beneath. Raymond drilled to depth, blew the hole clean with a can of compressed air from the tool compartment, threaded the bolt in by hand, and set it with a torque wrench to 210 foot-pounds. Then he clipped a load cell to the bolt head and pulled 4,000 pounds of tension against it for 90 seconds without letting up. The bolt did not move. "That's the test," Cook said. "That's the proof load. 4,000 for 90 seconds against the working direction. If it holds that, it'll hold the pull." Raymond moved to the second position and started drilling. "You want to time it?" Cook pulled out his phone. He timed it. The second bolt held 90 seconds without movement. He watched Raymond drill and set the two redundant anchors and proof test them the same way, one at a time, no shortcuts. "All right," Cook said quietly, more to himself than anyone. "All right." The full rigging took Raymond 2 hours and 9 minutes. He positioned the Sterling 140 feet below the Kenworth on the only level section of road available on the Gorge side, angling the front axle against the rock face at a 15-degree diagonal, so the mountain itself became part of the braking platform. The primary cable came off the upper drum, ran uphill through 2 snatch blocks hung on the rock anchors, redirected back down to the Kenworth's rear frame. Raymond spent 14 minutes selecting the connection point, a crossmember behind the drive axle that would take a straight pull without distorting the frame geometry around the cab. The second cable ran from the lower drum at a 22-degree upward angle to the front frame, positioned to begin rotating the cab off the rock face as the first cable walked the rear axle back to the road. Neither line was designed to lift the truck. They were designed to walk it, to use the truck's own weight and the shape of its fall to guide it back the way it had come. Doyle watched from behind the barrier tape. His regional director called during the rigging and asked for a status update. Doyle looked at Raymond threading cable through the upper snatch block and said, "We have an alternative recovery in progress." The director asked what equipment was being used. Doyle looked at the Sterling's flat cab and the fixed tower and said, "A 1947 Sterling Model 34. I'll call you back." There was a pause on the line. Doyle ended the call. If you're hooked on this story, take a second to subscribe and turn on notifications. These old iron stories don't show up on the algorithm easily, and your support is what keeps them coming. Thank you. 6 men standing on a mountain road in April watching an old man rig a recovery by hand. No hydraulic boom positioning, no computer-assisted load distribution, no outrigger deployment sequence. Just cable running through blocks, bolt set in rock, a man who knew the angle he needed and was getting it. The crew had stopped talking somewhere around the time Raymond began running the primary cable and had not started again. Carson came to Raymond once during the rigging to ask about the cable rating. Raymond showed him the spool stamp. Military surplus wire rope, 3/4 inch, 26 strand, rated at 24 tons braking strength. Carson went back to his laptop, ran his load numbers, and did not come back. Raymond walked every cable when he finished, checked each connection point, each block hook, each anchor bolt by hand, looked at the angle the lower drum cable made with the Kenworth's front frame, decided it was 2 inches off the geometry he wanted, and moved the block uphill to correct it. He was not hurrying. Nobody said anything while he worked. Cook came over as Raymond was finishing the walk. 2 hours and 9 minutes of watching. And Cook was a professional who recognized careful work when he saw it. "The redundant anchors," Cook said. "You think a primary might walk?" "No. I think if it did, I want to still be standing here when it happened." Cook nodded, said nothing for a moment. "Good rigging." Raymond looked at him. "Good machine on your rotator. Wrong road for it, that's all." That was the full exchange between them. Raymond climbed into the Sterling's cab. The seat had a split in the vinyl that Cleet had patched with electrical tape sometime in the mid-1970s and Raymond had left alone because it held and because some things you don't fix when they're not broken. The gauges came up in sequence as the engine turned over. Oil pressure, coolant temperature, then the winch hydraulic pressure climbing steadily to its working range. The Sterling's engine did not rev. It idled at the same low RPM whether the drum was turning or not, a sound that had been the same on every mountain road since Cleet drove it home from Murphy in the rain in 1961. Raymond engaged the upper drum. The cable came taut in 12 seconds. The snatch blocks settled hard against the rock anchors. The Kenworth's rear frame crossmember took the load, and the Sterling's frame pressed down through the rear axle into the asphalt, all 22,000 pounds of it pressing down and not lifting, the weight working the way Cleet had explained it when Raymond was 19 years old standing in the barn. When the load comes on, the truck gets heavier, not lighter, and heavier means grip, and grip means pull. For 38 seconds, nothing visible happened. Doyle stood 90 feet uphill with his hand resting on the barrier tape. Carson was beside him. Cook had moved to a position where he could see both the Sterling and the Kenworth at the same time. 3 of the flagmen were at the lower barrier looking up the road. Nobody was talking. Then the Kenworth moved. Not fast. The rear axle shifted maybe 5 inches toward the road surface, forward and slightly up, the mud breaking its seal around the dual tires with a low sucking sound that traveled across the gorge and came back off the rock face. Raymond held the tension, did not increase it, held it steady and let the truck's weight redistribute. Let the mud release its grip at its own speed. Let the load find its own way. Then he engaged the lower drum. The Kenworth's front frame took the second cable, and the cab began to rotate. Slowly, less than a degree at first, the crushed driver's door pulling away from the rock face with the sound of stressed metal releasing the pressure it had been holding for 44 hours. Carson took 2 steps forward. Doyle's hand tightened on the barrier tape. Raymond worked the 2 drums together, upper and lower, walking the truck in measured increments. 6 inches of rear axle travel, then 4 inches of cab rotation, then 6 more inches of axle travel. No surge, no overpower, no attempt to force the load faster than the ground would allow it. The way Cleet had worked the Sterling above the Ocoee River in the spring of 1971, when a county grader was buried to the axles in a hillside slide, and the operator had walked down the mountain rather than wait for a machine that might not come. The way you work when you know the machine, and know the load, and know the ground, and have nothing left to prove to the people watching. The Kenworth's rear axle cleared the gorge edge 22 minutes after Raymond engaged the first drum. The cab cleared the rock face 9 minutes after that. 31 minutes from the moment the cable went taut, the Kenworth was rolling on all 6 axles toward level ground under its own weight, engine still running, the Sterling walking it uphill at 3 miles per hour in its lowest gear with a cable tension that Cook said afterward he would not have believed if he had not been standing there watching the gauge the entire time. Raymond set the parking brake when the Kenworth reached flat road. He shut down the winch, sat with the engine idling for a moment, then climbed out and began coiling the lower drum cable. He did not look up at the crew. He did not look at Doyle or Carson or any of the 6 men who had been standing on that road watching since he engaged the drum. He coiled cable the way he always coiled cable, starting from the connection end, working toward the drum, keeping the coil even. Doyle came down from the barrier. He stood watching Raymond work for a long time. Carson came with him, but stayed back a few feet. Cook came from the uphill side. "Mr. Elkins," Doyle said. Raymond kept coiling. "How much do we owe you?" Raymond pulled the lower block off the front frame connection and set it on the road. He looked at the Kenworth sitting upright on 4 flat tires on the closed highway. Then he looked at Doyle. "Nothing. Sir, you just saved us the helicopter lift, the delay, and the Monday inspection. Your truck's out. Road opens tonight." Raymond picked up the block. "That's the job. I have to pay you something." Raymond pulled off his cap, smoothed the brim once, put it back on. He said, "My father bought this machine to work mountain roads. He didn't ask the rate before he rigged up. He walked the block back to the tool compartment and set it inside. Buy your crew dinner. They've been up here long enough." That was the last full sentence Raymond Elkins said on Route 64 above the Hiwassee Gorge that afternoon. Ray Dombrowski told every foreman and contractor he knew in Lackawanna and Susquehanna counties about the 73-year-old who pulled a D9 out of a hollow that 5 recovery companies had walked away from. Word moved through the construction and mining community the way it always moves in those towns, slowly and completely. Over the next 5 years, Walter got called out 7 more times. Always the same kind of job. Soft ground, tight access, geometry that made modern heavy equipment useless. He never raised his rate. Twice he didn't charge at all. Walter Cech died in 2007 at 79. The Brockway went to his son Dennis, who kept it running 3 more years before donating it to the Anthracite Heritage Museum in Scranton, where it sits today. Rick Dalton's company filed for bankruptcy in 2009, over-leveraged on equipment loans it couldn't carry when construction dried up. The Brockway had no loans. It had been paid for in 1952 for $875, and everything after that was clear. If you're the kind of person who watches old iron do what new money couldn't, subscribe. Because that's what this channel is. That's what happens when you maintain what your father left behind and show up when everyone else has already gone home. The engineers said nothing could pull it. The old man fired up the Brockway anyway. Cook walked to the Kenworth and put his hand on the frame rail behind the cab. He stood there for a moment with nothing to say and then walked back to his rotator, climbed into the operator's seat without starting the engine, and looked down the road at the Sterling sitting below. Carson Webb had opened his laptop again, but he was not typing. He was standing at the barrier with it open in his hands, looking at the Sterling's fixed tower boom against the April sky above the gorge. Doyle called his regional director back. He said the road would be open by nightfall. The director asked if the alternative recovery had worked. Doyle looked at the Sterling. Yes, he said. It worked. The director asked again what the machine was. Doyle said, a 1947 Sterling. I'll send you the documentation. One of the flagmen, a man named Eddie who had been running the lower closure since Tuesday morning, said to the man standing next to him, that old thing did it in 31 minutes. The other man said nothing. There was not much to add to 31 minutes.